You're listening to episode 283 of the Membership Guys podcast. Today we're talking about a serious and somewhat scary subject, keeping your WordPress membership site secure. You're going to want to buckle up and stay tuned for this one.
You're listening to the Membership Guys podcast, bringing you proven, practical tips and advice from the leading experts on growing a successful membership business each and every week. And now, here's your host, Mike Morrison.
Well, hello there. Welcome to episode 283 of the Membership Guys podcast. I am your host, Mike Morrison, one half of the Membership Guys, and you are listening to the number one show for membership site owners. Today, we're talking about website security, keeping your WordPress membership website secure. Scary stuff, nerve-wracking stuff, and something that I know a lot of people who aren't technically inclined, and actually a lot of people who are, get a little bit concerned about. Now, despite some of the scaremongering out there, WordPress isn't some crazy risky platform that's riddled with security problems. The fact that it powers over 35% of all websites in the world just means that any security issues that do arise are under an enormous magnifying glass. With 455 million sites in the world using WordPress, even if just a tiny fraction of those experience security problems, that's still a lot of sites. So you're going to hear about issues a lot more than you'll hear about them with other platforms, simply because there's a lot more people using WordPress. However, there is a combination of three factors that do mean that you need to be extra vigilant about your WordPress security. First of all, the fact that it powers 455 million sites definitely makes WordPress more of a target. The counterbalance to that is that there's also a lot of people, very smart people, involved in keeping it secure and responding extremely quickly to any issues. So it's definitely a bigger bullseye, but there's also that's kind of coupled up with a bigger team to respond and fix any problems, certainly bigger than most other platforms. The second factor that does raise the need to be extra vigilant is that the system of using plugins and themes that are being created by third parties, so that just means people who didn't build WordPress, that does open the door to some problems. If you install a dodgy plugin that some dodgy person has created, then that can introduce a vulnerability into an otherwise secure website. And thirdly, most people using WordPress are not particularly tech savvy. That's the great thing about WordPress, is that it enables someone who's not a web developer, not a programmer, to build something that would otherwise be impossible for them to create without knowing how to code. It makes it so easy that people often take just the complexity of what you can do with WordPress, they take it for granted. However, it's a double-edged sword, as you then end up with people who aren't techies responsible for tech maintenance. And that's not a failing of those people. You simply don't know what you don't know. So in this episode, I'm going to share my top tips on keeping your membership site secure. First off, ensure that both your WordPress core and your plugins and themes are kept up to date. Now, WordPress now has the ability to turn on automatic updates for plugins, so that whenever there's a new release, they will automatically update. If there's a security problem, you automatically get that update. You don't need to log in there and update it. Now, WordPress itself, so the main engine of WordPress, doesn't automatically update in most cases unless you've turned it on. However, when there are security issues identified, they do automatically apply an update to whatever version of WordPress you're using that will address those issues. So even if you've forgotten to switch to a newer version of WordPress, there will be security patches for the version that you're using that will be applied automatically in almost all cases. You can also use a service like managewp.com. So that's a service that will automatically keep all your plugins and themes and your WordPress core updated for you, as well as perform backups, scan for security vulnerabilities, and other important tasks. ManageWP is particularly handy if you have several WordPress sites, because it lets you manage them all from a single dashboard. And while we have decades of experience in web development and advanced programming within the Membership Guys, we still use ManageWP ourselves just because it makes all this stuff a lot easier and automates a lot of those core things too. So first thing to keep your WordPress membership site secure, update. Make sure the WordPress core and plugins are kept up to date. You can either do this manually. It's a lot easier to do this now with automatic updates, or invest in a service like Managed WP that will automate it all for you. Second tip, make use of a security plugin. We're fans of Security, S-U-C-U-R-I, Security. It's a great security plugin. There's other great options on the market too. WordFence is another fantastic security plugin. And by the way, any of these links, any of these plugins I mentioned, if you head on over to the membershipguys.com/283, all of these links are going to be included on the webpage as well, so you can click through. You don't need to scribble them down or try to figure out through my weird accent how to spell things. So Security and WordFence, each of these, you wouldn't use them both together, but they're both great security plugins. These plugins will put a number of safeguards in place on your site, as well as scan for vulnerabilities. They'll keep a log of any failed login attempts. You can see if someone's trying to get into your site, or files on your site that are being altered, or anything else that would set off alarm bells. In addition, if you're using something like Security, they actually have an option to use a firewall. It's not free, but this is an extra layer of protection that can block malicious bots and scripts and so on before they even reach your site. It's more complex to set up the firewall. It obviously costs a little bit too, but can be worth looking at for extra protection, belt and braces and all that good stuff. Third tip, ensure that your hosting company has security measures in place too. So it doesn't just come down to you. Your hosting company can have stuff in place that will help you on the security front. So when we're talking about things like firewalls, make sure you speak to your web hosting company about what security measures they have in place. They should have some sort of firewall, and some hosts will have additional security tools active. Now, you'll often get more security mechanisms in place on managed services like WP Engine, or if you're running a VPS or a dedicated server. So for example, Liquid Web, who we use for our VPS, they have a security firewall. They also have brute force protection. So, if you have someone who's running an automated script that's basically just firing lots of guesses at your admin password, and they're trying to do it by brute force, that's why it's called brute force attack, then again, there's protections in place on the server that stamps those out. Plus, there's additional security protocols using something called mod security, which again is just another layer of security that will pick up on certain types of behavior, certain types of operations, and so on that are common with security threats. And then they'll block all of that out. And if someone keeps getting flagged, they block their IP and all that sort of stuff. So all of these things add just extra helpful protection. So again, speak to your web host about what security measures are in place on your server. That's tip 3. Tip 4, take regular backups. Your hosting company should have an option for taking regular backups automatically. Again, it might be something they charge you a little more for, but it's worth it to be able to quickly roll back to a working version of your site from before it was compromised. Again, services like managedwp.com, they can take backups for you, or you can use plugins like Backup Buddy to back up your site to a remote location. So you can back up a full copy of your site to Amazon S3 or even to your Dropbox account so that you've got a local copy on your computer. Trust me, if something goes wrong on your site, if the worst happens, having that backup will be a lifesaver. Next tip, make sure that you're practicing good password discipline. Use strong, unique passwords. Don't use the same username and password combo that you use on every other website. Don't use dumb passwords like ABC123. You're going to laugh at that, right? But, I won't name names. I worked with a client well over a decade ago with a multi-million-dollar business. That was their password. It's crazy. It didn't get as bad as using the word password as your password. Some people still do that. It's 2020. We shouldn't need to say this, but unfortunately, we do. Ideally, consider using a password manager that will generate very secure passwords that you won't need to worry about remembering, because the password manager tool will actually store them for you in a very secure way. And make sure that others on your site that have admin access or access via FTP, access to your hosting account, make sure that they have good, strong, unique passwords that they change regularly and all that sort of stuff. Ideally, using two-factor authentication. So that's where when you try and log into a site, a text gets sent to your phone or to an email to your email address. That gives you an extra little code that is needed to log in. If you can do that on your hosting account, on your server, even on your WordPress account, you can get plugins for that, then that just adds a little extra security. And on the subject of making sure that other people on your site have good passwords, be careful about who you give access to. Only give people admin access to your website and to your hosting account and server who absolutely need it and who you absolutely trust. If you need to give admin access temporarily to your web designer or maybe someone from tech support at your plugin company, make sure you remove their account after they no longer need it. It's not about not trusting those people. It's about there being an additional potential account that someone could get into. So, if your web designer has used a great password, but actually their passwords for various other accounts get leaked somewhere in a password leak in a year's time, and their admin account is still on your site, it could be compromised. So again, any temporary access, make sure those accounts are removed after they no longer need it. If you have staff or maybe subcontractors who do things on your site like adding or editing content, give them a user role in WordPress that only provides the access that they actually need. Someone who adds and edits content doesn't need to be an admin. There's an editor role in WordPress that will let them do everything they need while ensuring that they can't access things like your plugins and your theme files. Again, this isn't about not trusting those people, although that's obviously something you want to make sure that you do. It's also about if that person's account got hacked, how much damage could somebody do? Yes, it's not going to be great if someone can, edit the text in your blog posts. That's not great, but it's certainly better than them being able to get access to your plugins, to install a malicious plugin, install dodgy themes, to edit your theme files, and so on. Also consider using a role management plugin so you can get more advanced role management plugins for WordPress. That gives you a little more granular control over what the people on your team can and can't do on the admin side of your membership. So definitely be cautious over admin access to your site. Next tip, try to limit how many plugins you use and remove ones that you no longer need. Now, more plugins doesn't necessarily mean your site is more susceptible to security issues, but the more plugins you have, the more you increase the risk that one of them might be poorly coded or might not get an update that it needs to address a security problem. And it also means, obviously, the more plugins you have, the more plugins you need to update. And so if you've got 50 plugins in your site, then you might feel it's more of a chore to have to update these plugins, or you might be a little more scared of updating them. And that is going to lead to outdated plugins, which increases the risk that one of them might have a problem that goes unaddressed. So don't just recklessly install plugins willy-nilly. Only install plugins from credible sources where you can see they have a good track record, they provide good support, they have good reviews. Oh, and by the way, this is why you don't get premium plugins that normally you have to pay a developer for a license to. This is why you don't circumvent those developers and get the premium plugins from dodgy websites. There are, unfortunately, some websites out there that will either sell for a very cheap price or give away premium plugins that someone else has built. So someone has just ripped the code off, or they've removed the licensing restrictions, and they're giving you this cheap or this free way of getting something that you might otherwise have to pay a few $100 for to get a license. You might prefer getting these plugins for cheaper or for free. You might prefer that to paying yearly for a license, but you have no idea whether they've been messed with, whether they've had malicious code added. And even if none of that's happened, if you're circumventing the developer, you're also circumventing updates, you're circumventing support. So if there's a security issue with these, knockoff versions of plugins that you've got, it's not going to receive the update because you won't have the license that gives you access to those updates that will include important security patches. So next tip, the 8th and final tip, be careful about what you let members and other users on your site do. So this specifically relates to websites where you might let users upload files or add content to your site. When you do that, you're opening a pathway to your database and to your website's file system that could be exploited if you haven't been careful. So if you let someone upload any file type that they want, they could upload a malicious file that can be used to wreak all sorts of havoc on your site. If you let people add content and you're not using a good plugin or a good feature that does that will filter it through a little security check first, then they could sneak some nasty code into their text that could open up your database or even inject dodgy stuff onto your web pages so that ads or pop-ups show when anyone from the public views them. Now again, this just comes down to putting a little extra thought into your decision making about whether or not to offer this functionality, and also ensuring that you're using secure, well-reputed plugins. So for forms where people can add content, use something like Gravity Forms, which takes care of ensuring that people aren't uploading dodgy files and even lets you restrict which types of files can be uploaded. Or for things like forums or social network features where users are going to be adding content to your site, make sure you're using trusted, well-established options like BBPress and BuddyPress. Usually, if you're going down the plugin route to let users add content to your site, it can be easy to tell what's a good plugin, what's not a good plugin, and if in doubt, you can contact the developers to ensure that it's secure. However, quite often, a problem can occur if you're paying someone from Fiverr.com to write something custom. They might be able to create you something that lets people add content, lets them upload a file, but chances are they're not going to include the safeguards in there that ensure that it can't be exploited for nefarious reasons. So, those are my 8 top tips for improving the security of your WordPress membership site and reducing a lot of those common risks that can occur as a result of those 3 factors that I discussed at the beginning. So those 8 tips again. First, ensure that you keep your WordPress core, your plugins and themes up to date. Second, make use of a security plugin. That's going to put a lot of good safeguards in place. Third, ensure that your hosting company has security measures in place. Have that conversation. Ask them, what are you doing to keep my site secure? Fourth, take regular backups. If something does go wrong, they will be a lifesaver. Fifth, make sure that you're using strong, unique passwords and that people on your team are doing the same thing. 6, be careful of who you get access to. Don't just give admin access to anyone. If you need to grant temporary access, remove the accounts when they're no longer needed, and make sure you're not giving people on your site more power than they need to do their job. 7, limit the plugins that you use and remove ones that you no longer need. And finally, be careful about what you let your members and other users of your site do in terms of adding content or uploading files. Now, if the worst were to happen, there are services that can help you out if you don't have a web developer available. So if you get hacked, if something gets compromised, there are solutions. First up, Security, who I mentioned earlier. They created one of the most popular security plugins for WordPress, and they also have a service whereby if your site is hacked or infected, you can pay them to come in and work to remove the issue. You can also use services like WP Fixit or FixRunner, which can do the same thing. WP Fixit in particular has a one-off payment. It's very affordable and they are reliable and well reputed. And of course, if you've taken backups as suggested, then that's going to seriously help you out if worst does come to worst. But hopefully, if you follow my advice and the best practices that I've shared, then that's going to make you far more resilient to anything like this befalling you and your membership. So hopefully that's given you some good pointers to go on to keep your WordPress membership site secured. Hopefully, I do hope it's given you a bit of peace of mind. I know this is a scary subject. And as I said, I think people exaggerate the security issues around WordPress. It's just that you're under a bigger microscope using basically the world's biggest and most commonly used content management system. But following good practices will steer you right. Making sure that you have all these things in place we've talked about is going to put you in a far better position to avoid any potential issues. That's it from me for this week. Hopefully you found it useful. I'll be back again next week with another installment of the Membership Guys podcast.